I want to start off by just the title in the program is slightly different. I want to really spend today clarifying what World Heritage actually means for the Great Barrier Reef. And the reason I want to do this, I think there's many people in the room who know a bit about World Heritage, and we're going to be talking about it a lot over the next few days. And I would guess that World Heritage is going to be very much on the agenda for at least the next 2 or 3 years. So whilst there are some people who know a bit about it, I think there's a lot of misconceptions and myths around World Heritage. So I want to try and take the opportunity to clarify some of those. For those of you who know about the World Heritage nomination back in 1981, it was listed at the time, it was considered to be of outstanding universal value because it did meet 4 natural criteria that were in place at the time. It was, at the time, the first coral reef to be listed, and for many years it was the largest MPA and the largest World Heritage area in the world. Perhaps some of you aren't aware, when the IUCN did their evaluation, they made this statement: if any one coral reef in the world were to be chosen for the World Heritage list, the Great Barrier Reef would be the site chosen. You might also not be aware that that nomination document that's shown on the left-hand side there was about 40 pages in length. About a third of that was pictures. Today, if you do a World Heritage nomination, it's a huge document with all sorts of appendices and scientific backup. But in those days, it was a very different approach. So I want to spend my talk, as I said, clarifying some of the aspects that are perhaps not so clear, talking about what outstanding universal value really means. I want to clarify the criteria. I think this is a really important one because people are getting confused about what the criteria are and the values. I want to talk about the World Heritage Area and the Marine Park because they're slightly different. I want to put the World Heritage Area into a global context. I want to show some of the trends of the values, and others during the 2 days will be doing a lot more about this. Outline the committee's recent concerns and decisions, and talk about World Heritage in danger. OUV, or Outstanding Universal Value, has a clear definition in the World Heritage operational guidelines, and I'm just going to, again, pick some key bits of it. It talks about significance so exceptional to transcend national boundaries, so internationally recognised. It also makes it very clear this is for present and future generations. It says there are 3 key requirements for OUV. 1, it must meet 1 or more of the 10 World Heritage criteria. There are 4, or the 10 are regarded as 4 natural and 6 cultural criteria. There's also a requirement for integrity, and I'll come back to this. Is a really important concept which I don't think we've been focusing on. And there's also a requirement in the statement of OUV to talk about protection and management. So those 3 key requirements for a statement of outstanding universal value. But I really want to keep, like Terry did, these sort of terms in your mind. Internationally recognised, for present and future generations, and the issue of integrity I'll come back to. So in 1981, when we were declared as a World Heritage Site, these were the criteria. I won't ask you to read the stuff in yellow, but just be aware those were the words in 1981. The dark or the black writing on the left-hand side is really a sort of summary of what the 4 criteria meant in 1981. Today, the wording has changed, and people get confused about whether they should be using today's criteria or the 1981. The other thing I'll bring to your attention is the area shown in the red circle, which in 1981, one of the natural criteria had the very clear statement, man's interaction with his natural environment. Now that part of the criteria doesn't even exist in the equivalent criteria today. It's now been taken out and is regarded as a thing called cultural landscape. So that's an important part, and I'll come back to that one as well. But basically the advice from IUCN and from the World Heritage Centre, the clear written advice, is that the 1981 criteria are the ones that we use in determining both the statement of outstanding universal value for the Great Barrier Reef and the basis upon which we determine changes. So the criteria have changed and the numbering have changed. And again, people get confused. What has been agreed is that we use today's contemporary numbering. So when we're comparing and doing a comparative analysis for new World Heritage sites, we know which criteria they're inscribed against, so we use today's numbering. But it's very clear we use the old wording of the criteria. So again, I'll just bring you back to those 4 sort of general terms. We're talking about natural beauty in 1, significant physiographic and geomorphic features, significant ongoing ecological and biological processes, and that's the one where man's interaction came in. And the last criteria 10, significant natural habitat for conservation. So how do we take those 4 criteria and put it into something that the World Heritage Committee can use as a baseline for assessing values and changes? We've got a thing called a Statement of Outstanding Universal Value. Every site is required to prepare one of these statements. And the guidelines are pretty succinct. A statement should be in about 2 pages. Well, the Great Barrier Reef one is about 5 pages in length. It's an enormous, compared to other sites, document, but trying to take the complexity and bring it down to 5 pages has been very hard. But basically, that statement, which is now approved by the World Heritage Committee, has a brief synthesis to start with. It addresses the 4 natural criteria from which we're inscribed. It talks about integrity and it talks about protection and management. Now, the protection and management part of that statement is written in a contemporary way. However, the committee made it very clear, and the advice was the previous parts of the statement were to be written as if it was written in 1981. This is important. So again, this is part of the statement, and I want to really bring you back to these words. So in the approved statement, approved by the World Heritage Committee, it says, and this is that link, the hook of the human interaction with the natural environment is illustrated by strong ongoing links between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in their sea country. So whilst we are not inscribed for our cultural criteria, in the existing statement of OUV for the Great Barrier Reef, there is a very strong link for Indigenous people and their sea country. So it's important to recognise this is a retrospective statement. Whilst it was approved in 2012, it was written as if it was based on information available in 1981. We couldn't, in other than the protection and management section, use contemporary information. So today it appears out of date. But the committee basically wants a statement as a baseline from the time it was inscribed to be the benchmark against which they can determine whether changes are occurring. So that's how it's regarded. So the purpose of the statement is very clear, and this is set out in a document called the Operational Guidelines. Basically, it says quite clear this is the key reference for the future effective protection and management, the basis for the future protection and management, and it also makes it very clear the state party, i.e. Australia, and partners must ensure sustainable use does not adversely impact the OUV and integrity. It's a bit funny because integrity is actually part of OUV, but that's clear wording in the operational guidelines. I want to talk now about values because, again, there's some confusion. The values of the Great Barrier Reef are a lot more than the World Heritage values or its OUV. So OUV is just the tip of the iceberg for all the values that we deal with. What we do have is under the EPBC Act, this thing called Matters of National Environmental Significance. And there are 7 matters of NES in the Great Barrier Reef that need to be considered. So this is a table out of the recent strategic assessment. And I won't ask you to sort of read the words, but just be aware that down the left-hand side, I've listed some of the values. And across the top, I'm talking about these 7 matters of national environmental significance. World Heritage here is broken down, so we're talking about the individual criteria and integrity. And then across the rest of the top are some of the other matters. And one of the matters of NES is the fact Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. And that's actually a very broad one because of the object of the Act, which I'll come back to. So you can see there the values on the left-hand side are picked up not just through OUV, but through all the other matters of NES. And same if you look at other values, and down the bottom of that list you'll see Indigenous and Historic Heritage. They are picked up as triggers under the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Act, even though both are not overtly in the World Heritage. Indigenous, there is that hook in there that I mentioned before, but it's not as strong as we'd like. I now want to quickly talk about the difference between the Marine Park and the World Heritage Area. The map on the left-hand side shows the sort of broad area, and both the park and the World Heritage Area share the same seaward or eastern boundary. Both have that outer edge exactly the same. And so what we're talking about is a huge area, bigger, as Terry said, than many countries that are on the World Heritage Committee. The Marine Park, however, is smaller. It's only 99% of the World Heritage Area, and that difference is really when we come to the landward boundary, the one along the coast. So both the park and the World Heritage Area legally have the same sort of words, but there's a number of exceptions. So in the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, the federal marine park does not include most of the islands within that outer boundaries. When I say most, there are 70 Commonwealth islands, things like Lighthouse Islands and Defence Islands that are part of the Commonwealth Marine Park. But there are about 930 islands that are not part of the Commonwealth Marine Park, they are part of Queensland. Tidal waters and tidal lands around those islands are also not part of the Commonwealth Marine Park unless they're adjacent to a Commonwealth island. There are a number of port exclusions, and it's important to recognise the port exclusions that are not part of the Marine Park are not the same as the official port limits that Queensland use. So again, there's subtleties here. And also internal waters of Queensland, things like Hinchinbrook Channel or the Narrows near Curtis Island. So these slight differences between the Marine Park and the World Heritage Area are actually really important when it comes to some of the legal aspects that we're dealing with. And it's probably best to look at it and illustrate it by, if we zoom into around Curtis Island. So this is just a satellite image of the area I'm talking about, and that's a map of the Marine Park boundary shown in that bright red colour. And again, I'll just stress, the Marine Park boundary around this area does not include Curtis Island. It does not include that dark grey area, which is the port limits excluded from the Marine Park, or sorry, the port exclusion areas. It doesn't include the light grey areas, which are, in this case, under the State Marine Park Act, some of which are internal waters and some of which are tidal waters. So the Marine Park Act is quite different from along low water, but the legal boundary for the World Heritage Area basically says along the coastline at low water. So the World Heritage Area does include the islands, all the islands within that outer boundary, and it does include port limits and things like that. Quickly, let's talk about the size of the Marine Park and how it was for many years the largest. Today, we've slipped in terms of large MPAs. We're probably even, and I think, further down the list with some of the other big ones that have come in. But 3 of those large MPAs are now also World Heritage Areas. So Phoenix Islands and Papahanaumokuakea were both declared in 2010, and they're both larger than the Great Barrier Reef in terms of size. However, I think it's not just about size, as a lot of people know. Of the 47 marine World Heritage Areas, out of the, now we've got about 1,000, I think there's over 1,021 since the last meeting, World Heritage Areas. 47 are regarded as marine. 1/5 of those include coral reef areas. And so places like Belize, Aldabra, New Caledonia, we've got coral reefs in about 1/5 of the marine World Heritage Areas. As I said, the Great Barrier Reef is no longer the largest, but I would say it's probably one of the most important. In terms of the latitudinal cross-shelf diversity, certainly we've got more diversity than any other marine World Heritage Area. And I would argue, and I'd stand to be corrected by the experts in the room, probably the most important World Heritage Area on the planet for its range of biodiversity. And I don't have to tell you guys, these are the sort of facts that back that up. Over 1/3 of all the world's soft coral and sea pen species, 6 of the world's marine turtles, etc. A huge range of biodiversity for which we're responsible in the Great Barrier Reef. Many of you have seen the strategic assessment that was released last year and recognise how we've used it to assess how we're going. And in this case, we've assessed outstanding universal value. We did that by developing a series of grading statements, and we deliberately chose a 4-point scale. So you couldn't go in the middle, you had to either go on the good side or the poor side of the scale. We also chose to put in a series of trend arrows. And again, in the case of OUV, this trend is benchmarked from the date of inscription, 1981. So is the trend improving, is it stable, or is it decreasing? We also, in the strategic assessment, have started talking about our confidence in making these statements. And so this is just some of the parts of the statement of OUV. So what we've taken are excerpts directly from the statement, and we've assessed them using that colour coding, whether it's very good, the emerald green, good, poor, or very poor. So in criteria 7, the one about natural beauty and superlative natural phenomena, basically stable or decreasing. In terms of criteria 8, basically stable. However, if you start breaking this down, and again the strategic assessment does that, and we start looking at, as Terry's talked about, inshore and offshore, it's quite clear that in the northern part of the Great Barrier Reef, we can say it's good and stable, but the situation in the southern is quite different. So the southern inshore, very poor and deteriorating. And from the side, the confidence of that is very strong. So we can summarise basically what the overall trend is in OUV, and unfortunately, there's a lot of downward arrows. Criteria 8, the one about geomorphic and physiographic, is the only one that's very good and basically the only one that's stable. All the rest are deteriorating. over half the components that are assessed in that strategic assessment are showing that deteriorating trend. Over half of them are going down. And I bring you back to what Terry talked about. This is the object of the Act. Terry talked about protection and conservation, but I also want to stress the word heritage values is in there, and heritage values is very broad, and it includes world heritage. The other thing that Terry also talked about is the second part of the objects. They have to be consistent with the main object, but you'll see there the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park is responsible to assist in meeting Australia's international responsibilities for things like the World Heritage Convention. I want to come back to this issue of integrity. Remember, it's one of the three key pillars of OUV. It's absolutely critical. Integrity is defined, it's got a definition talking about wholeness and intactness, but it also, in the operational guidelines, talks about three key requirements. Firstly, including all elements to express its OUV. In other words, as Terry said, everything that's there has to be is part of the integrity. It talks about adequate size and representation of the features and processes, and it also talks about the adverse effects of development. So in the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park assessment, again, the strategic assessment, we did the assessment against those three elements of integrity, and again, we've got 2 downward arrows, and the overall score for integrity was basically good, but deteriorating. I want to stress, though, integrity is not just something that's in the World Heritage literature. Integrity actually appears in our own legislation. In 4 of the zone types that are in the zoning plan, preservation through to buffer, they all specifically refer to natural integrity. For 3 zones, it talks about protection of the natural integrity in the objective. And for preservation, it says about the preservation of natural integrity. So I stress integrity isn't just about World Heritage, it's in our own subordinate legislation, the zoning plan, and it's specifically an object for at least a third of the park, and then, as I said, we've got it in the World Heritage for the whole park. So it's really an important part, and I think something we're not taking seriously at the moment. Quickly jump to the World Heritage Committee's recent decisions. 2011 was when they first started focusing on the current concerns. I want to stress this isn't the first time the World Heritage Committee's looked at the Great Barrier Reef. If you look on the website, you'll see that they've had statements of, or requests for statements of conservation right back to the 1990s. But in 2011, they expressed extreme concern about the developments occurring along the Queensland coast. They asked for the strategic assessment, which is now being, the draft is out and we're finalising it, and they asked for a mission. In 2012, they considered the mission report. They noted with great concern the significant impact on OUV, and in 2012 they started saying, in the absence of substantial progress, the possible inscription of the property on the list of World Heritage in danger. 2013, they were welcoming a lot of things Australia had done, the independent assessment of Gladstone. They were still concerned about the limited progress, and they still said the concern represents a potential danger to the OUV of the property. Just recently in Doha, last month, the 2014 meeting, they welcomed again the progress made on the strategic assessment and the progress with water quality, but they still raised strong concerns about approvals in the absence of a completed strategic assessment and the absence of the long-term plan, which is expected next year. So let's focus on their committee's perspectives. Since 2011, they've talked about extreme concern. Since 2012, they've talked about the possible listing on the list of World Heritage in danger. And at the last meeting, very clear, they want an updated report by February next year for examination at the next meeting in June, with a view to considering the ascertained or potential danger of the OUV and the possible inscription on the World Heritage in danger list. I want to quickly talk about these two things because, again, people perhaps aren't aware. The operational guidelines actually makes a difference or distinguishes between ascertained danger and potential. So ascertained is faced with specific and proven danger, such as a serious decline in the population of endangered species or other species for which the property was illegally established. Helene, I think, might talk about that one. Severe deterioration of the natural beauty or scientific value, as by industrial or agricultural development, including use of pesticides and fertilisers. John. Major public works, other people. So, I mean, this is pretty clear what the World Heritage guidelines are about. Potential danger, major threats which could have deleterious effects on the inherent characteristics. modification of the legal protective status, development projects within the property that the impacts threaten the property, threatening impacts of climatic, geological or other environmental factors. Now, before people jump straight on the climatic one, the World Heritage Guidelines do say, and this is their wording, threats or the detrimental effects must be those which are amenable to correction by human action. So a number of people have already tried to have all the World Heritage sites listed in danger because of climate change. The committee's come back and said, look, we believe that's not going to help the issue, and they put this statement in. So they recognise climate change as having a major impact on World Heritage properties, but they're not trying to have every site listed in danger overnight. So let's quickly look at in danger. We've currently got 46 of the 1,000 sites on the World Heritage in danger list. If we look at Belize, a coral reef area, the issues for which they're on the in danger list are things like coastal developments, human settlement, loss of mangroves. Many people aren't aware that the Everglades in Florida is also on the World Heritage in danger list. It was actually put on the list in '93, came off in 2007 because of the World Heritage, the US delegation of the committee asked for it to come off. The US government actually asked it to go back on because the US federal government saw it as a good way to try and get the state of Florida to increase and improve their protection of the Florida Everglades through water quality. So the US government is still quite happy for the Everglades to stay on the World Heritage in danger list. And they've, as I said, kept it on up till now. So it's clear this isn't just something that's applied to undeveloped sites. There are a lot of those 46 sites, undeveloped countries where there really are issues from armed conflict and things like that. But it is also something that happens in developed countries. The operational guidelines make it clear these are things that may be corrected by administrative or legislative action, such as cancelling of major public works. So they're quite clear what can fix the issues of in danger. So World Heritage in danger listing can be rescinded, and there's an example this year at the meeting where a site that was listed in danger showed the committee that it had addressed the impacts and it was taken off the World Heritage in danger list. So just to conclude, GBRMPA's reports, and there's been two out, the Outlook report and the 2013 strategic assessment. We're about to get another Outlook report, it's to be launched shortly. But clearly they say the values integrity are under unprecedented pressure. And they also talk about that clear and deteriorating trend for many values and for integrity. The spotlight of the international community is very much on the GBR. It's more than just the committee. There are 21 countries on the World Heritage Committee, but there are many other countries, there's 186 signatories to the convention, and many other countries who aren't currently on the committee go to committee meetings and work with the committee members. And so many of the others are also looking closely at the Great Barrier Reef. An awful lot's going to depend on what happens and what decisions are made in the next 12 months. And only time will tell whether the committee itself decides to have the World Heritage area listed on the World Heritage in danger. I want to thank you, particularly thank Terry, and I want to just leave you with a quote which I'm sure many of you have seen, but I think it's pretty relevant to what we're talking about. This is North American colleagues. I'm sure you've seen it before, but as I said, I think it's relevant. Thank you.